The atmosphere in Judge Judy's courtroom was tense, almost crackling. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat firmly at the defendant's table, shoulders squared, eyes fixed straight ahead, unfazed by the commotion around her. Across from her, Judge Judy Shanlin, known across America as the toughest judge on television, leaned forward from her bench. Her iconic stern looked more intense than usual. Congresswoman Crockett's voice sliced through the room like a razor. "I've been hearing all about your theatrics in Congress. Honestly, I think someone needs to remind you what respect for authority looked like." The courtroom froze. This wasn't any regular case. It was a high-stakes special episode featuring one of the most controversial young lawmakers. And Judge Judy looked more than ready for a fight. What unfolded next would become the most-watched moment in the show's decades-long history and would skyrocket Jasmine Crockett's political image to a whole new level. "Your Honor," Crockett began, her voice calm, but edged with steel. "With all due respect, I'd suggest you double-check your facts before coming at me." The room erupted in gasps. No one talks back to Judge Judy ever. But Jasmine Crockett was about to go toe-to-toe with her. And what she said next would leave the legendary judge completely stunned for the first time. In the show's 25 years on air, if you're curious to see how Congresswoman Crockett stood her ground against America's most formidable TV judge, hit that like button and subscribe. You won't want to miss moments like this. But to understand why this clash became so explosive, you first need to know who these two powerhouse women really are and what led them to collide in that courtroom. Judge Judy Shanlin has ruled courtroom TV for more than 20 years. At 81, she's built an empire on being sharp, brutally honest, and entirely allergic to what she calls nonsense. Her no-frills style, rapid judgments, and razor-sharp commentary have made her one of the highest-paid personalities on television. Born and raised in Brooklyn, she fought her way through law school, served years as a family court judge, and eventually became a household name. She's used to being the smartest voice in the room, and she rarely meets a challenger she can't silence. But this time was different. What made this moment so dangerous for Judge Judy was that she'd been quietly growing more annoyed, watching Jasmine Crockett rise in national politics. To someone like Judy, who made her name enforcing rules and respecting hierarchy, Crockett's aggressive questioning of powerful people felt like defiance, like showboating. On the other side stood Jasmine Crockett, everything Judge Judy wasn't. At 42, she's a former civil rights lawyer who's carved her own path in Congress by confronting the most powerful figures. Without flinching, be it federal judges or Supreme Court nominees, she didn't inherit her position. She earned it step by step by out-preparing and outperforming everyone in the room. Crockett grew up knowing that respect has to be earned, not demanded. Her background in law taught her to lean on facts. Her experience as a black woman in politics taught her that she'd need to be twice as sharp to get half the credit. She's not easily rattled by titles, age, or status. What matters to her is truth and justice. This moment wasn't just TV drama. It was a collision of two completely different views of power and respect. Judge Judy represented the traditional guard, respect authority first, question later. Crockett symbolized the new wave. Authority must prove itself through integrity and action. Whoever came out on top would signal something bigger. What kind of leadership America was ready to follow? Would it be the seasoned voice of experience or the sharp mind of someone unwilling to back down? Everyone in the courtroom felt the weight of what was about to unfold. Two of the boldest, brightest women in the country were about to clash, and only one of them would leave with their reputation fully intact. The confrontation began the moment Judge Judy called the room to order. What followed was something no one watching would ever forget. This was meant to be a special courtroom episode focused on congressional ethics and the role of public service. But things took a sharp turn the moment Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett took her seat. Judge Judy glanced over her notes with dramatic flair, then looked up. "I've been following your time in Congress," she began, her tone heavy with disapproval. "And frankly, I haven't been impressed." There was an uneasy shift among the audience. It was already clear this wasn't going to be a neutral exchange. It had gotten personal fast. "You seem to think that raising your voice and being combative somehow equals effectiveness," Judge Judy continued. "But what I see is someone young who still doesn't know how to properly show respect to those with more experience." Crockett didn't flinch. Her face stayed neutral, but those familiar with her could spot the subtle tension forming around her eyes. Judge Judy had just crossed a line, questioning her intelligence and her respect. "Your Honor," Crockett replied smoothly, her voice steady. I'd be more than willing to go over my record with you. I think you might actually find it enlightening. But Judge Judy wasn't there to have a conversation. She had come to deliver one of her signature on-air takedowns. Don't use that tone with me, she snapped, her voice rising. I've been practicing law since before you were even born. I've seen countless attorneys think they're the smartest in the room. And you know what they all have in common. They're usually wrong. The air grew tighter. Judge Judy was clearly trying to assert control through age and authority. You want to talk about achievements? She added. I've been on television for 25 years, earning more than most politicians ever will because I know exactly how to deal with people like you. Crockett leaned just slightly. Her voice stayed calm, but it carried a sharper edge. With all due respect, Your Honor, I'm not sure what you mean by people like me. Could you clarify that? That question hung there, quiet but explosive. The courtroom felt it. She'd just put Judge Judy on dangerous ground. Even Judy, perhaps sensing she had overstepped, shifted tactics. What I mean, she said, trying to recover, is politicians who think they can walk into long-standing institutions and flip everything upside down without earning their stripes. You've barely been in Congress for a few years, and already you think you have the right to vet Supreme Court nominees and federal judges. And that right there was the moment Crockett had been waiting for. Judge Judy had just shown that she fundamentally misunderstood how Crockett's role in government actually worked. Your Honor, Crockett said, her voice now more commanding, shaped by years of courtroom battles. I think there may be some confusion about how our constitutional system operates. The energy in the room shifted again, this time in her favor. Crockett wasn't retreating. She was getting ready to strike back. Judge Judy, thinking she still had the upper hand, pushed harder. Don't try to school me on the Constitution, young lady, she snapped. I've been interpreting the law longer than you've been alive. The problem with your generation is you think you know everything, but you don't understand institutional respect. She pointed straight at Crockett, her voice hitting the signature note that made her a household name. You want my opinion? I think you're just another grandstander who uses drama to get attention. Real lawyers handle their work quietly, with dignity. But in that moment, Judy had unknowingly stepped right into Crockett's trap. By attacking her professionalism and credentials, she had opened the door for Crockett to do exactly what she was best at, defend herself with preparation, facts, and composure. Crockett leaned back, the faintest hint of a smile forming. Those who'd seen her in action during high-pressure hearings knew what was coming. Your Honor, she said coolly, pulling out a folder from her briefcase. Since my qualifications and understanding of constitutional law are now on trial, I think this would be the perfect moment to go over some key details. Judge Judy raised an eyebrow, still confident. And what exactly could you possibly have in there that's relevant to any of this? Well then, Crockett said, unfolding a set of papers with precise calm, let's begin with something. You mentioned earlier about respecting institutions and conducting business quietly. The room fell into total silence. Everyone could feel it. Crockett was laying the groundwork for something big. You noted that you've spent decades interpreting the law, she continued, her voice steady. That's certainly true, but I think the audience might be curious to examine how you've applied the legal understanding in some of your most high-profile rulings. For the first time, Judge Judy's confident expression wavered. She was not used to being on the receiving end of scrutiny, especially not in her own courtroom. Crockett slid several documents out from her folder. Your Honor, I took the time to review a few of your most publicized legal decisions during your tenure as a family court judge before you transitioned to television. That caught everyone off guard. Never before had someone brought Judge Judy's real-world judicial record into question, let alone on her own show. What exactly do you think you're doing? Judy demanded, though her voice lacked the bite it had earlier. I'm simply illustrating the difference, Crockett replied evenly, between courtroom theatrics and sound legal reasoning. Since you question my qualifications, I thought it only fair we take a closer look at yours. The audience was hooked. This wasn't a typical Judge Judy exchange. It was a legitimate legal showdown between the skilled attorneys, and the tables were turning. Crockett held up the first document. Here's a 1987 case where you denied a single mother child support. Your justification was that she should have made better life choices, rather than turn to the court system for help. Judge Judy's cheeks began to flush. That decision was based on the facts at hand, she insisted. Perhaps, Crockett said, flipping to the next page. But here's what's relevant. 3 years later, the appellate court overturned that decision, stating that your reasoning failed to meet legal standards and relied too heavily on personal opinion. The crowd murmured in disbelief. Judge Judy, America's courtroom icon, was being fact-checked live, and it was clear she hadn't anticipated it. What happened next changed the entire dynamic of the confrontation. Clearly rattled, Judy made a critical misstep. She stood abruptly, her voice sharp and defensive. "How dare you stand in my courtroom and challenge my legal decisions?" she shouted. "I don't care what some appellate court said. I know how to run a courtroom." But Crockett didn't even flinch. In fact, she leaned into the moment. "With respect," she said, her tone unwavering. "This isn't about running a courtroom. It's about the integrity of the law and the decisions that impact people's lives. If we can't question and hold each other accountable, then what are we really doing here?" The room was utterly silent, the tension palpable. Crockett had not only defended herself, but had also turned the spotlight onto Judge Judy's own record, forcing her to confront the very principles she claimed to uphold. It was a masterclass in composure, preparation, and the power of truth. That brings us to an important distinction. This isn't actually your courtroom, is it? The silence that followed was thick, as if the air itself had stopped moving. "What did you just say?" Judge Judy asked, narrowing her eyes. Crockett rose from her chair, her presence commanding. Her years of constitutional law experience were now fully visible. "I said," she repeated, "this is not a real courtroom. This is a set. You're not a sitting judge. You're a retired jurist who now works in entertainment. You arbitrate televised disputes for an audience. That's very different from holding actual judicial power." The crowd gasped. Someone had just said out loud what no one had dared to admit, and it had hit Judge Judy like a hammer. "The authority you're trying to assert over me as a sitting member of Congress," Crockett continued, "doesn't exist. I am an elected federal official. You are a private citizen working in broadcast television. Our positions in the real legal and political systems are not equivalent." For the first time in her entire career, Judge Judy was speechless. She had just been dismantled methodically, respectfully, and with irrefutable logic. The moment was transformative. It would be replayed millions of times and taught in law schools as a textbook example of how to challenge authority without losing composure or professionalism. Still standing, Crockett spoke with calm authority. "Since we're discussing respect for institutions, allow me to clarify how ours function. As a member of the U.S. Congress, I swore an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. That oath includes a duty to oversee both the executive and the judiciary." She opened the next section of her folder, branches of government, including asking Supreme Court justices to account for their conduct and ethical behavior. Judge Judy attempted to cut her off, but Crockett pressed forward with the calm precision of a lawyer who had done this hundreds of times before. "You called that grandstanding," she said, eyes locked forward. "But the Constitution not only permits Congress to perform oversight, it demands it. It's called checks and balances, and it's the backbone of how our democracy functions." She reached into her folder and pulled out a small booklet. The Constitution itself, Article 1. Section 1 grants legislative power to Congress. Article 1. Section 8 gives us authority to regulate the courts, including the Supreme Court. So, when I ask questions about judicial ethics, I'm not being disrespectful. I'm doing exactly what the founders envisioned. The audience sat in complete silence, absorbing every word. This was no longer a courtroom spat. It had become a live masterclass in civics, delivered by someone who clearly understood the law better than anyone expected. "Your Honor," Crockett continued, "you said I don't understand respect for institutions, but with all due respect, I think you may not fully understand what my institutional duty actually is." She wasn't finished yet. Crockett reached for one final document, the one that would shift the energy in the room permanently. "You also claim that real lawyers conduct themselves quietly and professionally. That's an interesting opinion, but it's not supported by precedent." She held up a case file. "In McGrain v. Dougherty 1927, the United States Supreme Court ruled that Congress not only has the right, but the obligation to investigate government corruption and misconduct. The ruling said Congress's investigative authority is essential to informed legislation." Judge Judy stared at her, an unusual expression forming part disbelief, part reluctant admiration. This wasn't what she had expected. She had walked in expecting a political novice and instead found herself face to face with a constitutional law expert. So, When I question Supreme Court justices about undisclosed gifts, conflicts of interest, or failures to follow ethical rules, Crockett said, her tone firm but unshaken, I'm not performing. I'm carrying out a constitutional responsibility as defined by the highest court in the country. Then, Crockett shifted from case law to her own resume. You questioned my legal background earlier. Let me clarify that, both for you and for everyone watching. She held up a single-page document, her credentials. I earned my law degree from the University of Houston Law Center. I spent over a decade as a civil rights attorney, arguing and winning cases in federal courts to protect people's constitutional rights. I was elected to the Texas legislature, where I passed meaningful legislation. Then, I was elected to Congress, where I now serve on the House Judiciary Committee. The contrast was unmistakable. Crockett had earned her authority through education, advocacy, and public trust, not through ratings or syndication. My qualifications to speak on constitutional matters aren't based on TV popularity, she said. They're based on experience, education, and the confidence of voters who sent me to Washington. Then came the moment everyone would remember, the one that would echo across social media and headlines for days. You said I don't respect institutions, Crockett said, her tone sharpened but respectful. But what I think you really meant was I don't defer to power for its own sake, that I don't automatically bow to someone just because they carry a title or wear a robe. She paused. I have deep respect for institutions that earn it. I respect federal judges who uphold ethical standards. I respect justices who maintain impartiality. I even respect television figures when they understand the boundaries of their influence. The implication landed immediately, and the audience felt it. But respect for institutions, she concluded, doesn't mean blind obedience to people who claim power they no longer actually hold. Then, she delivered the line that would be quoted in articles, interviews, and future debates. You criticize my generation for thinking we know everything, but we don't think we know everything. We just know enough to ask the right questions of the right people at the right time. She glanced slowly around the courtroom. You built your career by holding people accountable, by demanding answers for their actions. So, tell me, how is what I do in Congress any different? The silence was deafening. Crockett's parallel had landed with full force. Judge Judy had spent years confronting people on television, but when someone turned that same energy toward the powerful figure she admired, suddenly it was labeled disrespect. Crockett's final point lingered, the real difference. When she asks hard questions, it's to Supreme Court justices with lifetime appointments, people whose decisions shape the lives of millions. And she doesn't ask for attention. She asks because it's her job. Decisions that affect millions of Americans. Crockett continued, and when you ask tough questions, it's usually about security deposits or minor car accidents. Then, calmly and confidently, she sat down, but she wasn't finished. Your Honor, she said, looking directly at Judge Judy, earlier, you mentioned that you've earned more money than most politicians could ever dream of. That may be true, but I don't measure success in public service by money. She leaned forward slightly, her voice now full of genuine conviction. I could have stayed in private practice and made a lot more. I could have taken a high-paying job at a corporate law firm, but I didn't. I chose public service because some things matter more than a paycheck. The courtroom was still. Even Judge Judy, long known for her tough exterior, seemed to realize this moment was different. Something deeper was unfolding. So, when you question my qualifications or how I do my job, Crockett added, her voice clear and unwavering, I need you to understand something. I'm not here for a paycheck, or fame, or television ratings. I'm here because I swore an oath, and that oath demands that I hold power accountable. I take that responsibility seriously because the Constitution demands it. For the first time in her long career on television, Judge Judy didn't have a response. She sat back slowly in her chair, her face a mixture of surprise, reflection, and, surprisingly, respect. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its edge. Congresswoman, she said quietly. That was quite a response. The words were soft, but they echoed through the room. She had made a name for herself by always having the final word. But today the pattern had been broken, I think. Judge Judy continued slowly. I may have misjudged you. Crockett allowed herself a small, knowing smile. That happens a lot, Your Honor. I've gotten used to it. The courtroom erupted. People who had arrived expecting to see Jasmine Crockett get scolded and Shutdown had just witnessed the exact opposite an extraordinary moment, where she remained poised, factual, and unshaken, while turning the tables on one of TV's most formidable figures. Some in the audience stood and applauded, others recorded with their phones, already knowing they had witnessed a historic exchange. This wasn't just compelling television. It was something else entirely, a lesson in how to face down authority when it overreaches and how to do it with intelligence, preparation, and grace. Even members of Judge Judy's own production team, people who had worked with her for years, looked stunned. None of them had ever seen her handled like this, and the aftermath was unlike anything television had seen before. As the episode wrapped, the air in the studio was electric. Judge Judy, clearly rattled, offered something almost unheard of from her: genuine respect. During the final credits, her voice sincere, she said, "Congresswoman Crockett, I owe you an apology. I walked in here with certain assumptions, and you've proven me wrong. I thought I knew what you stood for, but I was wrong." That apology shocked everyone. Judge Judy had built a decades-long career on never backing down, never admitting fault, and always owning the last word. However, Crockett's performance had been so meticulous, well-prepared, and respectful that even Judy had to admit she had been outmatched. Behind the scenes, producers were already discussing how to frame the episode. They knew they had something explosive on their hands, TV gold, no doubt, but they also realized their star had just been publicly out-argued in front of a live audience by someone half her age. Within minutes of filming ending, clips started surfacing on social media. Even though the episode wouldn't officially air for weeks, the buzz was immediate. The hashtag Jasmine Schools Judy was trending within an hour, and soon after, another started climbing. Hashtag constitutional burnout. Twitter lit up with commentary and clips. Legal scholar Lawrence Tribe tweeted, "Jasmine Crockett just gave Judge Judy a masterclass in constitutional law and institutional respect. This should be required viewing for every first-year law student." Legal Twitter, which had grown used to watching members of Congress fumble through oversight hearings, was electrified. Here, at last, was someone who not only knew what she was talking about, but delivered it with surgical precision. One tweet summed up the internet's reaction perfectly: "Judge Judy, you don't respect institutions. Jasmine Crockett, I respect them enough to hold them accountable. Game over." Crockett held up a pocket copy of the Constitution and said, "Let me walk you through exactly how authority works in this country." Within minutes, the internet did what it does best: memes flooded social platforms. One showed Crockett confidently holding a stack of legal documents with the caption, "When someone tries to school you on the law, but you actually studied law." Another featured Judge Judy's stunned expression with the words, "When the student becomes the teacher." Legal professionals across the country were watching. The American Bar Association's official Twitter account posted a clip of Crockett's constitutional breakdown with the caption, "This is why legal education matters." Law schools began contacting Crockett's office for permission to use the footage as classroom material. Harvard Law School's own constitutional law professor tweeted, "This is going into next week's lecture an ideal example of how to professionally challenge authority." Even federal judges took notice. One, speaking anonymously to the Washington Post, said, "She explained the framework of congressional oversight better than many practicing attorneys I see in court." But the moment wasn't just a legal showcase, it had immediate political consequences. Crockett's calm dismantling of Judge Judy's authority claims resonated far beyond the courtroom. She wasn't just a viral sensation, she was now being viewed as a serious legal voice. Within days, she received invitations to appear on major Sunday talk shows, not as a controversial firebrand, but as a sharp, clear-eyed constitutional expert. The Speaker of the House released a rare statement saying, "Congresswoman Crockett showed the kind of poise, clarity, and depth we need more of in Congress." Her defense of constitutional principles was nothing short of outstanding. Even some Republicans privately admitted they were impressed. One GOP member of the House Judiciary Committee told reporters, "I disagree with her on just about everything politically, but that was a masterclass. She knows her constitutional law, beyond law and politics." The moment reflected a deeper cultural shift. For years, Judge Judy had embodied unchallenged authority, the no-nonsense elder figure who always got the last word. But Crockett's response modeled a new kind of leadership, one that balances respect with readiness and professional pushback with airtight preparation. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't been rude. She had simply known more and delivered it with precision. Commentators quickly pointed out the deeper social dynamics at play. A young black woman had just calmly out-argued one of America's most recognized authority figures, not through volume, but through fact, logic, and grounded legal expertise. This, one columnist wrote, is what generational change looks like when it arrives prepared. Crockett didn't just defend herself. She defended the very mechanisms of democratic accountability. In the weeks that followed, both women saw their reputations evolve. For Crockett, it was transformative. She was no longer just known for fiery hearings. She was now being recognized as a legitimate constitutional scholar with real influence. Requests for speaking engagements poured in from law schools, civic organizations, and political forums nationwide. A book deal already in the works suddenly became a hot-ticket item. Publishers now saw her as someone who could break down complex constitutional ideas in ways the public could understand. Perhaps most telling, on Capitol Hill, her colleagues began to treat her differently. Committee chairs consulted her on legal strategy. Party leaders invited her into high-level meetings. She had earned something rare in Washington, bipartisan respect. As for Judge Judy, the aftermath was more nuanced. Some criticized her for being unprepared, others praised her for ultimately showing humility. In certain circles, her willingness to acknowledge Crockett's expertise actually added a new layer of credibility to her legacy, because even for someone known for always having the last word, this time it was what she didn't say that said everything. She was confident enough to admit when she'd been wrong. But the episode also revealed something deeper, the limits of her television authority. When faced with real constitutional expertise, legal analysts were quick to point out that while Judge Judy's presence works well in small claims disputes, it doesn't carry the same weight with standing opposite someone with genuine command of federal law. What unfolded on that stage wasn't just a viral moment, it became a set of lasting lessons that rippled through America's legal and political landscape. Lesson 1. Preparation outperforms intimidation. Crockett didn't win the exchange by raising her voice or dominating the room. She won by doing her homework. Every claim she made was backed by precedent, legal framework, and constitutional clarity. Her strength came from substance, not spectacle. Lesson 2. Respect isn't silence, it's precision. Crockett never got personal. She never raised her voice. But she made her case with such accuracy and poise that the impact was unmistakable. She showed that you can challenge authority without being disrespectful and still be absolutely unshakable. Lesson 3. Constitutional literacy matters. The episode exposed a glaring gap in public understanding of government. Crockett's ability to clearly explain how oversight works and where congressional authority begins and ends became not just impressive, but essential. Her knowledge was unshakable, and it showed just how rare that depth of understanding is among public figures. The confrontation also became a symbol of evolving leadership. What the next generation could look like: principled, well-informed, and unafraid to challenge outdated power structures. Crockett wasn't posturing. She wasn't performing. She was prepared. But perhaps the most meaningful legacy of that day was educational. Clips from the exchange began showing up in high school classrooms, college lectures, and legal seminars. Civics teachers used it to explain the balance of powers. Law professors cited it as a real-world example of effective legal argument under pressure. Political science departments used it to explore institutional dynamics and oversight in action. It even reignited a national conversation about civic literacy, with commentators pointing out how Crockett's clarity revealed just how little most Americans understand about the government. That serves them. Her approach inspired others. A growing number of young politicians began shifting away from sensationalism and turning toward substance, prioritizing real understanding over flashy soundbites. And among older political figures, there was a noticeable change in tone. It was now clear: underestimate the new generation at your own risk. Political strategists began reviewing the confrontation as a case study in how to handle overreach. Crockett proved that power could be challenged without chaos, that professionalism could carry the same weight as passion, and that you didn't have to shout to win. Even the media landscape shifted. Rather than spotlighting only the most dramatic or viral congressional soundbites, outlets began highlighting members of Congress who could speak with depth and clarity. Crockett's performance showed that people weren't just watching for outrage, they were hungry for real answers from those who actually understood what they were saying. In the end, the exchange between Jasmine Crockett and Judge Judy did more than spark headlines. It set a new bar, it showed that holding authority accountable doesn't require disrespect, and that authority, if legitimate, can withstand being questioned. Crockett had flipped what was meant to be a televised takedown into a moment of national education. She had turned potential humiliation into a powerful lesson that in a democracy, knowledge still holds weight and truth still carries power, especially when delivered by someone brave enough to speak it out loud. So, what did you think of Congresswoman Crockett's handling of the situation? Did she strike the right balance between respect and accountability? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more moments where preparation meets power. Because in a world where authority is often loudest, it's the calmest voice with the facts to back it up that leaves the biggest impact. The next showdown is coming. You'll want to be here when it happens. Oh.